Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to our monthly program. This day we have a very special guest, somebody who's not a stranger to all of you, Sister Ghada Ghazal. She's a PhD candidate at Catholic, and she's doing a presentation on the styles of the Quran. So without further ado,
Thank you.
welcome.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's an honor for me to be here at ICCP speaking about the rhetorical analysis about the Quran, which is in Arabic referred to as Nazm or Nizam al-Quran, the system or the styles of the Quran. And usually in the Western, in the Arab world or in the Eastern world, we study this like type of knowledge, but here in the West, when I came here to the US and in the Western academia, the focus is more about the majority of the scholar would adhere to historical critical method. And one of these books is by Nikolai Sinai, like the Quran, a historical critical introduction. And if you look at this historical critical method, it demonstrates the text to understand its historical origin in a diachronic perspective, like looking at the Quran as a book of history and trying to trace the stories as if it's happening in the history. And of course, this perspective, it's mostly Western one. However, the people who are interested in Muslim-Christian relationship, they found that this way is not good because you cannot trace the Quran just to apply the history method or historical method. And why they were doing that? Because this is the way they are doing and analyzing the Bible. So the Old Testament and the New Testament is like histories happened in one time, and a period of time or through periods of time. So after a while, the people in the West or the academia or the scholars, they found out that this is not working and we might look at the Quran in a different way. So instead of assuming incoherent text make up of independent fragments, some scholars, they say, let's start with the inverse hypothesis and look in the Quran with the hypothesis that it's a coherent text and the various parts of which they are like organically connected to each other. But even people, the Muslim in the Arab world, when they read any surah of the Quran, they feel it's disconnected because if you don't know the meaning and the logic behind that, you will find, like, for example, one story here, one piece of story here, one verse here, and you don't know how to connect that. However, so these scholars, the most important question that they impose they don't believe, of course, that the Quran is a revelation or a divine revelation, but they say, look, let's look at the Quran from this perspective. And the main question is the Quran composed of organic, originally independent fragments brought together randomly when the final collection of the Quran was made after the Prophet's death, and this is the historical criticism which dominates modern Quranic studies in the West? Or are these fragments or textual units arranged into a genuine composition to form a logical and coherent whole? So they put that question and start from there. And actually, this is not something new to the Muslim scholars, but because we have far away from these books and we don't have access to these books which are mainly written in Arabic, we don't know about this science. And there is like a history of the scholars who wrote about the Nizam al-Quran, that the Quran is organized in a very organic and coherent way. And one of the most important and famous, we have Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari, which is dated between 839 and 923 in his book Jami' al-Bayan fi Tafsir al-Quran. And in his book, he links verses with one another. And he spoke that there is a connection. When you read the Quran, the verses are connected. And then after that, we have, of course, a very famous scholar, Fakhruddin Abu Abdullah ibn Umar al-Razi, dated between 1150 and 1210, in his book At-Tafsir al-Kabir, he stated that most of the subtitles of the Quran are in the links and relationships between the Quranic verses. So he spoke about this relationship between the Quranic verses. And Al-Razi actually views the Quran Nazm in terms of linear connection to show that the verses of a surah are marked by continuity. Of course, most of the people who don't have access to Arabic, they don't have access to this knowledge or information. Also, we have Abu al-Hasan Ibrahim ibn Umar al-Bayqi, who is dated to 1406 and 1480 in his book نظم الدرر في تناسب الآيات والسور. And Al-Bayqi is one of the first scholars in Islam who would use the Old Testament and the New Testament in his interpretation of the Quran. And there were a lot of people who were against him because he was using from the Bible or from the Old Testament and the New Testament. So this is something, it's very old. It's 1,400. It's something not new, and people like they are not agreeing about it. So Al-Bayqi aims to show the relationship informing the consequences, the sequence of the, I'm not sure if I'm going to the second page here, yeah. So he looked at the sequence of the verses in the Quran as well as the surah in the received arrangement of the Quran. And also we have one famous scholar, and he is an Indian scholar, Hamid Adin Al-Farahi. And I am not sure because most of you here coming from like Pakistan or India, if you are familiar with this scholar, and this is like a contemporary, like in 863 and 930, so it's within the 20th century. He's an Indian Muslim scholar of the Quran, and he wrote Tafsir Nizam al-Quran. And in his tafsir, he contains an exegesis of 14 short surahs of the Quran. And I believe this tafsir is written in Urdu. And he discusses the notion of nazm within a surah, like there is a coherence within the surah and among the surahs that follow each other. And key to finding this coherence within a surah is the concept, he spoke about the concept of the amud, or what we can call the central idea, that each surah in the Quran, or every surah of the Quran, revolves around one central topic. And it is, if we can imagine it, when you throw a stone in the water, you know how it makes circle and circle? So each surah in the Quran, it has a focal point, and then one circle, and then one circle. And each circle has a focal point, but there is still one focal point to the whole surah. So he is the first one. He copied, he goes after Al-Razi, but he explained more about this idea of having amud or central idea for the surah. So for him, every surah of the Quran revolves around the amud, which is the central point, and all the verses of the surah are organically linked to it, representing a systematic unfolding of the contents of the surah from its beginning to the end. So there is like introduction, there is conclusion, there is a central point, but we have to look at the surah so deeply to see where is the focal point and where are the supporting and connecting ideas. And then we have, actually I am looking, if anyone can get me this tafsir, I will be really grateful. It's Amin Ahsan Islahi. In 1906 and 1997, he wrote a 9-volume, and it's in Urdu. I'm really now, I want to learn Urdu to be able to read this. It's a 9-volume Quranic tafsir in Urdu. And if anyone has an access to Pakistan and can get this, it will be, because I've been looking for this tafsir. Islahi applies Farahi's methodology of the amud, like the central point of the Quran, and he applies it to all the surah of the Quran. So he took each surah and look what is the central point and tried to connect to all the other verses in the surah. For example, and also he establishes something new. Islahi established what he called surah pairs. And he maintains that the surah exists in pairs. And we can speak in a different lecture about this. For example, Surah 2 and Surah 3, they are connected, and he will find the connection between them. Surah 4 and 5, Surah 6 and 7. So each forming a pair whose member surahs have complementary amuds. So there's also, he will look at what is the complementary amud or pillar or focal point for the two surahs or for the pair. And also, furthermore, he speaks about like the 140 surahs of the Quran exist as 7 groups. So he divides the surah of the Quran into 7 groups. And he said each group comprising one or more Meccan and Medinian surahs, and each surah in the group has an amud that deals with one aspect of the group main amud. So he divided the Quran into 7 groups, and also he spoke about what is the focal point for each group. So all of these, like they are Muslim scholars, and we have also one Muslim scholar, actually he is from my city in Hama in Syria, Saeed Hawa. And he has tried also to show the structure of every surah by dividing it into 4 different levels and to show how it is coherent. So all these Muslim scholars, they spoke about the coherence of the Quran. Mostly they are in Arabic and they are in Urdu. And it means the Muslim scholars, they think about that the Quran is coherent and unit, and they have like some studies, but till now we don't have like, contemporary studies. However, here in the West, the scholars, as I mentioned in the beginning, looking at the Quran in a historical perspective does not help. So they say, okay, we'll try to look at the coherence of the Quran to see if this book, which is for them is not divine, if it makes sense, if there's a coherence in these surahs that the Muslims believe in. So I will mention there is one important scholar, and I brought his 2 books. I'll just open, this one, we don't know like exactly if he is this real name, but he is known as Michael Kyprus. He published 2 books about the Quran. He is not known to be a Muslim. I'm not sure but he is not a Muslim. He has, the first book is The Banquet, which is about Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th surah of the Quran. So this book is an analysis of the structure and interpretation of the 5th surah of the Quran, which is Surah Al-Ma'idah. And also he tried to make some comparison where there is a story in the Quran and something similar in the Bible to try to figure out what are the similarities and differences. And in 2009, he took the prize for the best book in the Islamic studies. And he is a German scholar. And the other book, it's a Quranic apocalypse. It's a reading of 33 last surah of the Quran. And I'll just give you the book to look at, but I'll speak about this author for like maybe 5 minutes. So he's a Belgian, born in 1941, a friar and a member of the Congregation of the Little Brothers of Jesus, and has been living since 1989 in Egypt, where he is a researcher fellow at the Dominican Institute of Oriental Studies. He currently lives in Hajaza, a small city near Luxor, Egypt. He lived 12 years in Iran, where he had his PhD in Persian literature at the University of Tehran, and then worked at the University of Iran. He is the co-founder of Luqman, a journal of Iranian studies. He left Iran in 1986, and after studying Arabic, and in 1991, he became a researcher in Cairo. Since then, he focused on the rhetoric analysis of the Quran. His specialization in the literary study of the Quran text, particularly aspect of its composition and its intertextual relationships with the sacred literature preceding it. Why I'm reading it, it's just like I feel when I read about his biography and I read his books, it's like he's a non-Muslim, and he worked so hard to learn Arabic and to have access to the Quran, and he lived in different countries, and I feel just, shy of myself as a Muslim, like we are not exerting such efforts to learn about the sacred book, about the Quran. And we studied these books at the university, and some of you, they know I am the only Muslim at the department, and when the scholars and the students, they speak about the book, of course, this is what they have, and if there is no Muslim to criticize or to comment or to add, they take it for granted. This author, he has really done a great job, but still there is a lot of criticism because he is not like, he does not really fully understand Quran, and he is not Muslim, so you cannot say he can be objective to the Quran. So this is like, I feel like he makes it like for us, we have more responsibility to study and to analyze Quran. And I am mentioned here, I can distribute this. This is his contribution. As I say, like he has the prize for the book of the year, which is about Surah Al-Ma'idah, and I can distribute this. So for today, I want just to look at one surah, and I chose a small surah because if we want to analyze the rhetoric structure of the Quran with the long surah like Surah Al-Ma'idah or other surah like Surah Al-Baqarah or Surah Al-Nisa, it will take a long time. So I chose just a very short surah, which most of you know, which is Surah Al-Asr. And now Surah Al-Asr, if you look at it, and I want, even if you don't understand Arabic, to look at the structure and the rhythm. You say, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Of course, I put here there are different translations, and I feel more comfortable. I'm not sure if you are familiar. This is the Study Quran. It has been published recently here, actually not recently, maybe 2009. In the US, I think Al-Hibri Foundation funded this book, and it does not have any Arabic, actually. It has the English translation, and then there is a comment on each surah, and it gives you sometimes the comment from the Bible or from the Old Testament. So it's good, it gives you like good background about the verses, especially in comparative studies. So, but here I am putting the translation which Kyprus uses in this book, because he does not speak also English, so his book was published in French and then published in English. So this is a translation. So he's speaking about a book in Arabic he wrote in French, and he said at the beginning he relied on the French translation of the Quran, and then it was translated into English. So the translation he is giving in the book, and this is taken from the book, by the time, Asr, verily man is in loss, except those who believe and do good deeds, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patience. Before speaking about the structure and rhetoric structure of this surah, I just want to give a little background about the surah. Surah Al-Asr, which is usually translated as the time, and I disagree with this translation. We'll speak about this, like, for me, it's a wrong translation of the title. It's revealed in Mecca, and it is the 13 in the chronological order of the revelation, and it follows Surah Al-Sharh, Alam Nashrah. And now the title, it has been given like different translation. Al-Asr, if we look at when we say Salat al-Asr, it's the late afternoon, or it means the declining day, that the day is coming like to an end, or the last hour of the afternoon, or the entire afternoon, or late afternoon prayer, period of time, all these translation. Some also like refers to the era, Asr, of the Prophet. They are connecting the title that it's referring to the time of the Prophet through the renewal of the prophethood in it. And like this, one of the, let's say, features or characteristics connected or associated with surahs that Ibn Kathir mentioned in his tafsir, that whenever two companions of the Prophet would meet, they wouldn't part company until one of them recited Surah Al-Asr, in order to remind each other that we have to believe and do good deeds, and also we have to exhort one another to truth and patience. So it's a reminder for them. And viewed also in a previous surah, which is Surah At-Takathur, it can be understood as a reference to time in general, meaning like, you know, like people, they are losing and losing and losing, and they are just busy with this life. And now I'll come to the interesting part for me, which is the title, Asr. Now the Asr, it comes in Arabic from any word in Arabic. If you want to understand it, you have to go to the root of the word. And the Arabic language, like the Hebrew language and the Aramaic language, is a 3 letters root, which is Ain, Sad, Ra. A, Sa, Ra. And this, I think I've written it here. Just I will see if it is here. Yeah, it's here. If you know the Arabic letters, it's Ain, Sad, Ra. And Asara, it means to squeeze. You are as if carrying something and trying to squeeze it. This is the meaning of Asara. So it's actually not, we can say it's related to the time, but I'm speaking now linguistically, from the linguistic perspective. So it is relating to time that is declining or fading quickly, as if God is saying to you, there is no time. Time is passing so quickly. And you can see in our life how the time is like a dream, as if like the time Asr here is a symbolic of this like life, which is like so quick, the events, as if like you just open your eyes and the time is about to finish. You start in the morning and it's sunset in the evening. So it's more symbolic about the time that is declining or fading quickly. And if you also look at, if I return here, by the time Asr, or with the meaning of squeezing, or like you are squeezing something, and God is saying, verily, man is in loss. And man here is just referring to mankind in general. So I say like it's a very short time. The time is running away from you. You will be in loss. So as if God is encouraging you, you have really to hurry up. And then there is an exception for those who believe and do good deeds. And also this is in, when we speak about the structure in the Quran, most of the time when you look at the verses of the Quran, mostly we have the belief and then doing good deeds. So it's faith in action, because we can meet a lot of people nowadays say, I have faith in my heart. This is not enough, because the structure of the Quran all the time connected amanu, believe, and do good deeds. And not only this, you will be also in loss, even if you believe, even if you do good deeds, but you have to exhort one another to truth, and also to exhort one another to patience, sabr. And if you look at the first word, this is now the rhetoric structure in the Quran. If you look at Asr, this is when they look at the beginning and at the end and at the focal point. So the beginning is Asr, which is the declining of time, and then the patient, which is sabr. And if you look at Arabic, it's Asr and sabr. It's 3 root, Ain, Sad, Ra, and then sabr, Sad, Ba, Ra, and they have the same rhythm. They go. And if you look at it, it's very short time. It's true, it's a very short time, but it needs a lot of patience. Don't think it's like it's a short time, you can do things quickly. It needs patience. So God is connected time with patience. So the beginning starts with time, and the ending ends with patience. And if you look now at the focal point, which is the middle, believe and then good deeds. So this is the focal point of the surah. During this short time, and with having the characteristics of patience, you are going to face a lot of difficulties, and you have to maintain your belief, and you have to maintain your ability to do the good deeds, because it's not easy. Sometimes you get angry, you get nervous, you are disturbed, you forget what's going on, and this is the focal of the surah. So when they spoke about the surah now, they spoke, this is the focal of the surah, we cannot do without it, and then we have the beginning and the end. But also, they will look at still, like as I say, the structure or the rhetoric structure as if you are throwing a stone in the water. So now the main center or amud or focal point is the belief and good deeds. But so still we have other focal points, which is here loss, like you are done. God is saying to you, just in one word, God is swearing, and when God is swearing by something, it means it's really important. By the time, he is swearing by this time, and then he's saying, you are lost, you are done, you will lose your life and your afterlife unless you focus on these two main things. And also it's interesting here, if you look at the Quran and also the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is known to be very short, very specific, no repetition. And this is one of the linguistic miracles of the Quran. But if you look here, because I was discussing this in the class with the process, so you say the Quran is very straightforward, no repetition. And here, why we have this repetition? And exhort one another to truth and exhort one another to patience. God can say and exhort one another to truth and patience, and it will give the meaning will be completely right, and there is nothing wrong about it. But then when God repeats something, and this is in the rhetoric analysis, it means there is something. And this type of science, it's called in Arabic or in the balagha, al-itnab. You repeat something because there is an importance for that. So because sometimes it's to exhort one another to truth, it's really difficult. It's not easy. Sometimes you might lose your friends and your family because you are speaking the truth. So it means you have to exhort a lot of power, a lot of patience, and the same also to exhort one another to patience, because it's also very difficult. So as if God is saying to you, you need really to put your whole self to truth. You need also to put your whole self to the patience if you want to succeed, if you want not to be in loss. So many times when we read this is Surah Al-Asr, we read it very quickly, like this. We stand in the prayer, we say, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. We don't think about all of this, like, how the structure, how the rhythm, how, the choice of the word. When you say al-asr, khusr, sabr, it's all like, no human being can put, because, when the Quran was revealed, it was like a miracle by its language. It was challenging the poetry that, the Arab were, or the Arab in that era, they were very famous, just to bring one verse like this, and they were not able. And now, we cannot see the miracle of the Quran because we are far away from the Arabic language and far away from looking at this structure in a deep way, and from looking how these verses are connected to each other, and how one verse is connected to another verse, and how one surah is connected to the following surah. And just for example, if you start reading these verses with this eye, you will feel it gives you different perspective. Like, for example, if I want to go through another example, for example, Surah Al-Kahf, which we read every Friday. Every one of us, even before I study it, I say, why God is mentioning one story and then another story and another story? What is the connection? what is the introduction and what is the conclusion and what is the focal points of all this. So if you think about like the focal point for the first surah, which for the first story in the Surah Al-Kahf, the cave, like two persons, and one he has like a garden and the other does not have a garden, and it's about like the remembrance of Allah, and Allah is the one who gives this. If you look at the second story, when Musa was with Al-Khadir, and it's about like, for example, you follow the destiny of Allah. So the focal point is Allah is at work in every step of your story in life. And then if you connect it to the beginning and to the end, I cannot go through it now all because it's very complicated to go through this connection. But if we start looking at like reading each surah, what is the introduction is telling us? What is the conclusion is telling us? What is the focal points of each piece? We will start to look at the Quran in a different way. We'll start to enjoy looking at this. And this way, of course, like the scholars, when they give interpretation, there are different interpretations of the Quran. And there are people will say, for example, I read the Quran, but I don't understand what's going on. It's not an easy task to understand it's a miracle from Allah. This is the word of Allah, and you will find different interpretation. We'll find people like this Michael Kyprus and Muslim scholars speaking about this structure and the rhetoric analysis and trying to find the connection. You will find other scholars that they will speak about the miracles or the scientific miracles of the Quran. When the Quran speak about the sky, the stars, the universe, you will find other people, they will speak about just the history, as I said, the story, the history. So in order to have like a comprehensive understanding of the verse of the Quran, you have really to try to understand all these connected interpretation, and this needs time. It's a journey time. It's not like, for example, I read one surah and I get the meaning of it and I understand it. It's a journey of reading and exploring and trying to understand the connection and the surahs and revelation, and listens to, for me, like when I listen to any scholar, even if, for example, sometimes say, I don't like this style of this scholar, you will get something, you will understand something. And this is in today, I tried to focus just on to see how a very small surah can be divided into parts, into structure, into introduction, into conclusion, and what is the focal point, and then to understand the meaning of the surah according to this structure. Here, there are like some interpretation for the surah here. I will just read, I'll put it here. And if you look at the three short verses of, they contain, this is like some of the interpretation. If you look at these three verses, they contain the entire message of the Quran. You look at it, it's very small. It's just one line or 1.5 lines, but it contains the whole message of the Quran. Namely, human beings are in loss unless they turn to God. And Al-Shafi'i, who is a legal scholar, he said, were the people to ponder this surah, it would suffice them. If you just contemplate about the meaning of this surah and apply it, it will be enough for you. You don't need any other things because it contains the whole message of the Quran. And this surah can be seen as pertaining to both the life of the individual and that of the human species according to traditional Islamic belief. And it's speaking about, if you look at this surah, verily man is in loss. It means every individual, Allah is saying, you will be. And then it ends, exhort one another. So the Quran is about building your individualism, but then using that individual in support with each other. So, and this is, you can see it in other verses of the Quran, like in Surah Al-Fatiha, which we started, Iyaka na'budu, and then alhamdulillah, you are just saying alhamdulillah, and then you say Iyaka na'budu, all as a community. So in Islam, it's not an individual. Here, Allah is saying as if you have to work first on yourself as an individual, but then you have to use this, product. When you work about when you work on your belief, when you work on your good deeds, then you can exhort one another. So you start by yourself on the level of faith, because nobody can give you faith unless you work on that, and nobody can force you to do good or bad. You have to choose that. So you start on the level of the individual to believe and to do good deeds. Then you will be ready to exhort one another for truth, and you will be ready to exhort with one another for the patience. Because, for example, if you want somebody to help you in this journey, you want a person with faith, with good deeds. You will not look for a person, a person who is already in loss will not help you in the truth and in the patience. So as if God is trying, work on yourself, and then you can contribute to the community. Try to build your faith, try to build your good deeds, and then you will be beneficial, and you will be able to support and help people, especially in the path of truth and in the path of patience. And just if you look at the first two, by the time, and if you look at number 2, verily man is in loss. And this is, it's composed of oath. Allah is swearing by something, by the time, and then he is giving the answer. And when, if you know a person who is a good person and he swears, you believe him. God is swearing by Al-Asr, and he's saying, you are lost. You will be lost. You will be in loss. You will lose this life and the afterlife. And we can see this in our life. We see how people, they are in loss because they lost their faith, and they are losing also like the ability to do the good deeds. And the second half, which is 3a and b, except those who believe and do good deeds. And look here how it's interesting, and God doesn't say except those who believe and except those who do good things. Why? Because here, when you look, it's repeated. The structure is repeated for truth and patience. But here, except those who believes, and it should be for me like, and except those who do good deeds. Because you cannot separate them. It's in one person, in one individual, and you cannot separate faith from good deeds. It's one unit. But in the other one, here we have a community. We have different people. And we have it's different paths. This is the truth. Because some people, they go for truth, but they are not patient. And some people, they are patient, but they don't have. So each one is a different path, but we have to bring them together. But in the first one here, except those who believe, you cannot separate. You must have the belief and the good deeds together in one person. And if you look here, there is, as I mentioned before, there is this third segment, which is C and D, as I mentioned, it stresses the social behavior proper to organizing and maintaining the community of the believers. You cannot have a community of believers without truth and without patience. And also there is a certain semantic correspondence between the first members of the last two segments, those who believe, and so here, those who believe and those who exert one another. As I mentioned, you cannot exhort one another unless you have the belief and the good deeds. I think I can go through more, and a lot of scholars, just about this one line, they wrote a lot of interpretation and explanation. And just for me today, it was just to give an example how just the structure of the Quran and the choice of the word. If you look here, wal asr, and then here khusr, and here sabr, and it's called the rhythm of the Quran. If you are familiar with the poetry, like the poets, they try to put this rhythm, or if you listen to some songs, they try. And this is called the rhythmic structure of the Quran. And of course, if you look at this, you can find it in the Meccan surah, the surahs that revealed in Mecca, but you will not find this structure in the Medinian surah. And why that? Why is that? Because in Mecca, it was the beginning of the revelation, and Prophet Muhammad come with this as a challenge for the Arab people to bring something similar to that. They were very professional in poetry, and they will like put the best, poetry. And the Quran at that time, it say, if you can just bring one verse like this, try. They tried. Nobody could bring anything. So most of the Meccan surahs, they have this. You can find this rhythm, short verses, like you say, like I say, al-asr, khusr, sabr. But after the Meccan period, the people who believe now, they don't need any evidence. The evidence is there. When they move to the Medina, now it is more long surahs and more long verses. If you look, for example, at Surah Al-Ma'idah or Surah Al-Imran. Why? Because now we have the belief, the people who believe, and now it's about building the community. So it's not now about the rhythm and the structure. So this you can find about the rhythm, or what we called al-balagha, more in the Meccan surah, more than the Medinian surah. Though in the Medinian surah, we can also find some verses, but it's more about the structure and about the focal point of the surah, more about than the rhythm of the surahs. I think I will stop here just to give maybe 5 minutes just for the questions. Okay.
So, I have a question on the structure.
Sure.
You're saying that there is a structure for, like, in general, we read any book, there is a structure for every chapter. There is a beginning, end, and the conclusion, and the focal point. So is it true for every surah in the Quran, or is it like, is there any exception?
No, people, they are trying they are just putting theories. They want to understand. Because till now, even the Muslims, the scholars, because in what we saw, I don't know, لا تنقضي عجائبه, which is like its miracles of the Quran would never come to an end. So scholars now in the Western academia, why they are looking, they say, because just looking at the Quran as a historical book and looking at the, like, for example, Quran is oppressing women, Quran is, for example, is against, for example, the luxuries of the life, it does not work. It's just creating more problems. They want to look at the Quran from a different perspective and see. For them, of course, it's not coherent. For them, they are trying to put the hypothesis and say, let's try to figure out this. And if you have the chance, for example, for Michael course, when Surah Al-Ma'idah is one of the long surahs in the Quran, and he come, after all this analysis, he come to the conclusion, it has a focal point, it has like a structure. So we cannot say the Quran is just the fragments coming from here and there, and he is not a Muslim. He is just trying to do that from an academia perspective. But what I think, and he also done this for the last 33 surahs, and he came with the same conclusion. And as I mentioned, Islahi, who wrote the tafsir, the 9 volume of the Quran of the tafsir, he came to this conclusion. Of course, every one of them trying to focus on specific things, but the point is they want to tell the Quran is a coherent book. It's not a fragmented book. Even if we don't say, for example, because when we think about introduction, conclusion, and focal points, we think about it from the perspective of any ordinary book. The Quran is different. You cannot apply like the methodology of any book, because also there is a mistake in the Western academia. Most of the people who look at the Quran, they look at the Quran as a book. And the Quran is an oral. It's not a book. It has been written for us as a book to be able to read, but it's an oral revelation. And it's a mistake in the academia to look or to apply the methodology of a written book on an oral book. It has its own methodology, like, for example, and this is like the people in the West, they are not familiar with this knowledge, because for many scholars, we have what we called in al-qira'at, the different recitations of the Quran, and they have rules, but most of the Western scholars, they don't know about this. And this is our responsibilities as Muslims to study these qira'at and to study this methodology and to study the principles of the qira'at and to write books and to show the Western that the Quran it's an oral book. It has its own unique principles and methodology, and it has what we call the sanad, the chain. It has the recitation. It has like ilm al-tajweed. All of these, they are not familiar. They are just trying to take the Quran, and actually not the Arabic Quran. They are trying to take the translation and try to apply a Western methodology which has been applied on the Bible and try to apply it. Of course, they might come up with something good, but from the beginning, the application of the methodology is wrong. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. And also it answers some question that I had in my mind. Like I was about to ask, and then you answer it through his question about the oral and the written, because I always ask myself why there's no punctuation in the Quran.
Yeah.
And the punctuation is in the oral.
Yeah.
Not, and I don't know if you had this question with your colleague. Or
yeah, they ask about it. First of all, we have to know that when the Quran was revealed, it was revealed to the heart of the Prophet. Even the Prophet say, "Ma ana biqari," I am not a reader. And then "Iqra," read. So it was revealed to the heart. So, and it is oral. If we study the people at the time of the Prophet, they hardly you can find a person who can read and write. It's more oral. The media was like poetry. If one wants to praise somebody, he will just immediately like say a poem. If one want to criticize somebody, he will just answer with a poem. So it was an oral tradition, and we have to know the context and era of that time. So, and people, they were very like, very specific about like Arabic and grammar, and they are very good in that sense. And also they have the ability to memorize. And in this age, I think most of us, we are used to the Mac and things, and we don't have the ability to memorize. And in order to train your memory to memorize is something very difficult. Or even for me as an Arab and Muslim, it's hard. You have to spend hour and hour and hour to get it. And the Quran, actually, it was without any punctuation. It was not written in the book. There is one copy which kept with Hafsa, the daughter of Umar ibn al-Khattab, because it was written at the time of the Prophet. But most of the Sahaba, they memorize it by heart. And it was until many people who memorized the Quran, they passed away, they decide, okay, we want now just to save the Quran. And just having it in the book, it just to help us to read it. But the obligatory as a Muslim, you are obliged to rattil al-Quran tartila, not to read it. Like, some people say, wal asr inna al-insan, as if they are reading a book. This is not a recitation of the Quran. You have to learn the tajweed and the tartil and start feeling, when you hear the Quran, it transfers your soul and your heart.
We can take 2 last questions.
Okay. And then Nasli.
Okay. Thank you so much for this explanation. You've done it so well. I have one comment and one question.
Sure.
You say Quran was not a book, but it starts with Zalkal Kitab. It starts with that this is a book, this book, Zalkal Kitab. So if it's different from your explanation of is oral and
Yeah.
but it starts with Kitab. Secondly, you have mentioned some non-Muslim authors have written about different, for example, this one surah and then other surahs. What was the objective of this analysis? Was this to criticize, or was it to understand it fully and explain to others? If it was to criticize, did they achieve their objective in their conclusion? Did they say in concluding that this is what we want to do and this is what we find? And if they agreed, why didn't convert to Islam?
Yeah. Thank you so much for your comment and for your questions. First of all, as for the comment, as you mentioned, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. We have to understand اللوح المحفوظ. that the Quran was revealed and it's written in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. And when we say kitab, it's from the verb kataba, kaf, ta, ba. It's already maktub, it's already written في اللوح المحفوظ. And then it was revealed to the, in Laylat al-Qadr, to the first sky, and then the revelation starts. So when the Quran revealed ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ, it does not refer to the Quran we are carrying in our hands. Because at that time there was no kitab. When it was revealed, there was no kitab. This is for the comment. As for your question, and this actually question, it just bothers me a lot. For example, why a person like Michael Kors will spend years and years and years to understand Surah Al-Ma'idah and to write a book from the beginning till the end. And I come to sometimes when you have like an author who is like straightforward, he will, for example, he is an Orientalist. He is against Islam. You can tell from the beginning. When you find, for example, an author who is like, for example, for the Islam, this author, he really like, I don't know. And to tell the truth, there are a lot, now I am too much in this, like, let's say, this sphere, there are a lot of authors who start by just, they want to investigate. They are curious. What is this book that millions of Muslims, they believe, and they have strong belief, and they want just to understand. They come out of a curiosity, and they are sincere in that. And some of them, after that, they became Muslim, but they don't announce their Islam. And they say, if we stay non-Muslims, we can produce, and we can publish, and we can support Islam more than if we, for example, announce our Islam. And even I was speaking one time to my advisor, he said, if I announce I am a Muslim, I don't know if he is a Muslim, but he was just maybe joking or saying it, next day I will lose my job. Next day I will not be able to publish anything about Islam. I will not be able here in the class to teach about Islam. So because of that, we cannot judge anybody. We meet people with a good intention. We benefit from their scholarship. For me, whatever their intention, even if there's a person who is against Islam and writing about against Islam, I will read the book and see. And then it's our responsibility as Muslim to criticize this person or to correct this person. Like, this person is very good, but still there's a criticism. But unless you know the Quran and Arabic and you study the structure, you will not be able to criticize him. So it's our responsibility to take this production and work on it and produce something better for the Muslim Ummah, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Ghada. You really got my heart and mind going. And it's quite interesting that non-Muslims are doing what the Quran exhorts believers to do, to ask questions, to ponder, to have curiosity, to look for answers, educate yourself. But I feel like non-Muslims are doing such extensive study of the Quran, and I know that we've had like amazing scholars, and as you mentioned that their works are in Arabic, are inaccessible to non-Arabic speakers. So I really appreciate you shedding light on this subject. And if you could bring Al-Asr back up, I wanted to just share a reflection I had while I was looking at the meaning just side by side, that good works is followed by truth and patience. So good works must be imbibed with haqq, with truth, with sincerity. And then I feel like there's patience required to see the fruition of the good works. You know, sometimes we may do a lifetime of good works and may not see the fruition, and that fruition might be in the hereafter. And yet we are still exhorted to do good works, imbibed with truth, belief, and patience, whether we see the result or not, but we have this promise that we will eventually, Allah will reward every deed. That was one thing that I looked at. And I had a question about the recitations you mentioned. Mm-hmm. You said that, you know, in the oral tradition, there's punctuation, but not in the written Quran. So are the recitations like you know how in English where it matters where you put a comma or a period, it changes the meaning.
Yes.
So are the recitations such that different recitations give different meanings?
Yes. Thank you so much, Nazli, for your comment and for your question. As for the comment, it's so interesting what you mentioned. Sometimes you do something and you don't understand where it's guide you. And this happened for me personally. When I start, for example, memorizing Quran, and then I start learning English because I am Syrian, learning English is so difficult for me. I didn't like, if you are reciting Quran or memorizing Quran, people, you know, you become very conservative, you don't like go and learn other languages. And I was just sometimes wondering, what's the connection? What I'm going to do with this and this? And then traveling and meeting people and then participating. Sometimes I participate in a conference. But now, like, you know, I feel like every step in my life build on what I am here. So don't like, if whatever you are doing, even if it's very simple, don't like, you know, let yourself stop it. Just continue, because you have to be patient with yourself, with what you are having, and you need time and you need patience to build the knowledge. You need time to build the understanding. And also there is what it's called, when Allah see you really in the path of truth and patience, there is what we call al-ilm al-ladunni. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. If you have taqwa, Allah will give you knowledge. And this is ilm ladunni, it just will come to your heart. Because as you say, you are just looking at the surah which you read, but now you see something different, you have never think about it. And it comes to your heart from Allah. And as for your question, I'll answer the question, sorry. As you mentioned for al-qira'at, this is very interesting. Alhamdulillah, I finished. When you start memorizing, you feel like if you memorize the Quran, that's the end. You become hafiz and you know everything. And actually, this is the first step of learning. Because now the more you learn, the more you see you don't know anything. And in the Quran, the different qira'ats, and it's so interesting you mentioned different shuyukh, they will stop at different poses, and then in order to give different meaning. For example, I'll just mention one example from the Quran. When Musa, and he was serving the daughters of Shu'aib, and then in the Quran, وَجَاءَتْهُ إِحْدَاهُمَا تَمْشِي عَلَى اسْتِحْيَاءٍ. One of the daughter comes walking towards him like a shy. And if you repeat عَلَى اسْتِحْيَاءٍ قَالَتْ, also like you connected with the previous and you connected with the following, so you give different meaning. There is no time to explain this, but also the most important thing, there is in ilm al-qira'at, in the different recitation of the Quran, what it's called ilm al-waqf wal-ibtida', the science of stopping and starting. There are some stops in the Quran you cannot stop. It's wrong if you stop it. There are, like for example, if I say to you, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة. If I stop here, or you believe don't approach prayers, I completely change the meaning of the verse. And I'm giving the meaning which is opposite to what God's want. If I continue here, I have to continue. وأنتم سكارى, while you are drunk. So here, it's ممنوع. And there are different levels, like you say, for example, waqf kafi, waqf akfa. So there's a complete science where you can stop, where you can start, where you can resume. And there are and this is in order to take an ijazah of the Quran, you have to get all this knowledge before you take your ijazah.
Okay, thank you so much, Sister Ghada.
Can you give to Brother Muhsin? It's okay. Please.
No, we understand that.
We can pray.
We
It's
understand that, but we are doing a service to the community. So let me say this. This is an amazing presentation.
Thank you.
It opens the heart, our hearts and our minds. Even as we go to pray Maghrib,
Yes.
what you said now will have better meaning
Yes.
for the Maghrib prayer
Inshallah.
that we will pray now.
Inshallah.
I hope that the Imam will recite the Surah Al-Asr so that it sticks in
Enjoy
our
it.
mind. So I'm really, really grateful to you. I have heard of many analyses, but you brought a new perspective, and I'm also grateful for the fact that you brought in the writers who are non-Muslims.
Yeah.
Right? It puts us to shame,
Yeah.
and puts the community to shame.
Yeah.
Right? And may Allah, if they have made mistakes,
Amen.
let Allah forgive them.
Amen.
And we will meet them
Amen.
in Jannah
Amen.
just as much as we meet our principals and teachers
Amen.
in our schools who are non-Muslims,
Amen.
but who taught us to be what we are.
Inshallah.
So I'm really, really grateful to you.
I'm grateful
Right?
for the ICCP to have me and to give me the honor to speak about the Book of Allah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا
It's my
الله
pleasure.
أشهد أن
Thank you for
لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة وقد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
استووا استقيموا. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to again thank Sister Ghada for a beautiful presentation. We're very proud of her work. As you know, she's completing her PhD, so one thing is ending. Exactly 1 week ago, she got married, so something is beginning. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give her tawfiq in her personal life as well as her professional life. We wish her all of the success in this world as well as in the afterlife. We're very proud of her and everything she's accomplished and everything, especially in light of all of her experience in getting there. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless her and her family as well. I know that I cut short many of the questions, so please forgive me for doing so because of the prayer time. We do have dinner, so everyone is welcome to continue the conversation with dinner, inshallah. If you are interested in the balagha and the stylistic elements that Sister Ghada presented for us today, then you should follow it up with our Treasures of the Quran program tomorrow morning at 6:15. We'll be talking about Prophet Sulaiman. So we'll be talking about Prophet Solomon, and we're covering the second page from Surah Saba. So Surah Saba on the second page and the story of Solomon. Everybody's most welcome, and we'll be serving breakfast, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum.